I have the honor to welcome you all here today in this high-level panel on the role of Parliament for building peaceful and inclusive societies and countering violent extremism. I would like to start and welcome Their Excellencies, Her Excellency the Director General of UNESCO, the parliamentarians, and everybody here today, from politics, from religion. Warm welcome to everybody on this panel for building and for the work for building peaceful and inclusive societies and countering violent extremism. Especially a welcome to the parliamentarians who have traveled from far away to join us today in this most interesting discussion. This high-level panel will address a most crucial issue: how parliamentarians and politicians could contribute to the building of peaceful and inclusive societies, to the prevention of violent extremism, and additionally, we have an impressive number of people here from the UN system, the governments, parliamentarians, and the civil society members. Without further ado, let me start with our first distinguished speaker, who is Mrs. Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO. Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, has been the Director General of the UNESCO since 15th of November 2009, and was successfully re-elected for a second term in 2013. She is the first lady and first Eastern European to lead this organization. As the Director General of UNESCO, Irina Bokova has actively engaged in international efforts to advance gender equality, quality education for all, and combat terrorist financing by preventing illicit traffic of cultural goods. She is a leading champion in the fight against racism and anti-Semitism. Bokova has spearheaded the UNESCO's activities on Holocaust remembrance and awareness, and is the first Director General of UNESCO to appoint a special envoy for Holocaust education. Irina Bokova was a Minister of Foreign Affairs, coordinator of Bulgarian-European Union relations, and Ambassador of Bulgaria to France, Monaco, and UNESCO. She's had a illustrious career, indeed, and I'm sure she will continue to have a very big impression on the world. She has graduated from Moscow State Institute of International Relations and studied at University of Maryland, Washington, and John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, OIF. Irina Bokova has received state distinctions from countries across the world, and she's a doctor honoris causa of leading universities. It gives me pleasure to welcome you, Irina Bokova, Your Excellency, for us to hear your visionary talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for this very kind presentation. Dear Ambassador Kairat Abdurrahmanov, Permanent Representative of Kazakhstan for UNESCO, dear parliamentarians, dear guests, I'm very happy to be here among you because I do believe that the role of parliamentarians in countering violent extremism is extremely important. I would like, of course, to commend the Permanent Mission of Italy and the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics for this initiative. Having been a parliamentarian myself, I am deeply aware of the importance of parliaments as institutions elected by the people, that represent the people and that serve the people. Parliaments play a critical role to address the challenges of our times, but not everything can be solved at the level of governments or the United Nations agencies alone. We need solutions that are shaped by an informed democratic debate and are decided upon by general elections. Parliamentarians have the unique power to bring these solutions, as well as international organizations, closer to the people. And this, I believe, is the key to success. We see crimes against humanity perpetrated in the name of extreme ideologies. We see minorities persecuted, journalists silenced, killed. We see cultural heritage that belongs to all of us destroyed and looted. We see cultural cleansing. We see a rising humanitarian and refugee crisis. And I believe violent extremism is this red thread tying this picture together. There is no single cause for its rise, but one thing is clear. This battle cannot be won with hard power alone. We need soft power also. We need to win the battle of ideas through education, through democratic debate, through a better understanding of the history of each other's cultures and religions. This is what parliamentarian debate is all about, and this is also the spirit of the latest landmark resolution adopted by the Inter-Parliamentary Union in March 2016 on the protection of tangible and intangible cultural heritage of humanity. This starts on the benches of schools, and this is my first key message. Countering violent extremism starts with peace education, with textbooks and curricula that teach human rights. This starts also with critical thinking, with the teaching of history and religions, to help people respond to the propaganda of hatred. UNESCO is mapping approaches to human rights education across the world, with a view to sharing best practices. Framed by the 1974 UNESCO recommendation concerning education for international understanding, cooperation and peace, UNESCO is working to make learning more inclusive. In January 2012, UNESCO joined the United States and Brazil in launching the global Teaching Respect for All initiative to tackle the rise of intolerance and violence. UNESCO contributes to the Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force, and this contribution is underlined in the Global Counter-Terrorist Strategy. This builds also on UNESCO's long-standing work to develop guidelines for educators in human rights and intercultural dialogue. In 2006, guidelines on intercultural education. In 2011, guidelines for educators on countering intolerance and discrimination against Muslims with the Council of Europe and Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. In 2016, Teacher's Guide on the Prevention of Violent Extremism. UNESCO published Why Teach About the Holocaust to support educators in teaching the history of genocides and mass murders, because understanding the past can prevent discrimination today. In Iraq, UNESCO is working with the Educate the Child initiative and the government to reach 180,000 out-of-school children. In Afghanistan, UNESCO has reached 600,000 people with literacy skills, 60% of whom are women. And I just met a village, the women from a village, when I visited Afghanistan again at the end of May. And I saw for myself what literacy and how literacy can change life of women and also of whole families. In Jordan, with EU backing, UNESCO is supporting education quality and promoting skills for young Syrian refugees. In all of this, the role of Parliament is critical to frame the national debate, to adopt strong measures, to encourage policies of government, to reach out to the civil society and the private sector, to the academia, because I think parliaments are this link, this cement of every democratic society. And parliaments should strengthen these efforts to increase budgets, to adopt policies. I would say to strengthen the world team for peace. And I'm convinced we can strengthen this team and the number of voices speaking for peace if we bring back to education the 57 million children out of school today. So in this spirit that we must distribute, invigorate all these ideas about peace, mutual respect and tolerance, and I believe it starts also on the parliamentarian benches as much as on the benches of schools. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Irina. Thank you very much, Irina Petrova, for this very enlightening talk.
I will just say a few words, leaving the floor for the discussions that will come afterwards, and very interested to hear what will come out of the discussions. But just to highlight a few points to set the scene, and it is that violent extremism and radicalization is not a challenge that we can overcome with a sort of one magic answer. What we need is a real change, the one that has multifaceted responses and that address different aspects of the phenomenon, and especially the root causes. As you know, here at the UN, we are tackling the phenomenon of violent extremism practically every day. We have important tools from the Agenda 2030, adopted in September 15, that underlines also, among other things, the importance and the role of parliaments building peaceful and inclusive society. And parliaments is what we will speak today about. Then we have a resolution on the 10th anniversary review of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, which flags violent extremism as a rising threat, and a threat that we must counter in many ways, including through education and culture. And now we get to our second pillar of the day of today, of our discussion. And then, lastly, we have the Secretary General's Plan of Action to combat violent extremism that emphasizes the role of education, inclusion, and prevention at the national level in combating violent extremism. Ladies and gentlemen, we really need a societal and a cultural change that brings belief and hope in a better future, that brings a hope in a culture of peace. Too many are the aspects of violent extremism that we have to address, which have very, very profound drivers. So we have to go through the path that UN showed with all these decisions and instruments, but we also have to address the root causes of the society. We have to address and combat the profound drivers of violent extremism, like marginalization, inequality, discrimination, persecution, violation of human rights, intolerance for diversity, hate speech, and all this through education. Education is the key, and that is why we are really glad to have here Director General of UNESCO, Her Excellency Madame Bokala. So, who can best address this need of change in society? For sure, parliaments can, stemming out of people and serving the people. Thank you very much, and have a nice discussion.
This is one of the most prestigious conference rooms. It's today occupied by so many people interested in this very, very much important theme. And I'm really honored to be invited to this high-level panel. I am thankful to Her Excellency Madame Irina Bokova, Director General of UNESCO. UNESCO is one of organizers of that event. We are thankful to the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics, to the Permanent Mission of Italy. I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to congratulate sincerely Italy for its election as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. It's honor which my country, Kazakhstan, is going to share for the years 2017 and 18. As you know, last September, the leaders of our nations, world leaders, launched a bold and a very ambitious Sustainable Development Agenda, which the Secretary General, Honorable Ban Ki-moon, described as one in a generation opportunity, which is truly transformative. And we understand today clearly that many voices, including those of parliamentarians, have helped to shape these SDGs. And parliaments are
politicians for working hard all your life. We're really happy you come to us and spare us time. Thank you very much. We may say Irina. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really apologize.
Good evening again. I would like to continue our program, and I would like to welcome the Director of CTITF and UNCTT, Mr. Jahangir Khan. Dr. Jahangir Khan is currently the Director of the UN Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force, CTITF, and United Nations Counter-Terrorism Centers, UNCCT, in the Department of Political Affairs, DPA, in the United Nations Secretariat. Dr. Khan is currently the Director of United Nations Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force, CTITF, and UN Counter-Terrorism Center, UNCTT. In the Department of Political Affairs, DPA, in the UN Secretariat. There's so many names in it, but that's how it is followed. He has served, Dr. Khan, in different capacities at the United Nations for over 30 years, both as UN delegate for 9 years and as UN Secretariat official for over 21 years. Previously, he served as acting director and deputy director of DPA's Middle East and West Asia Division, MEWAT, and before that, of the Asia and Pacific Division, APD. Dr. Jahangir Khan also served as head of DPA Iraq's team and chairman of the UN Iraq Operations Group, IOG, for 5 years, starting with the 2003 Iraq War, and has supported the work of 6 successive SRGS and the United Nations Assistance Mission, UNAMI, in Iraq. Prior to this, he served as a deputy head of policy planning in the Department of Political Affairs before joining the UN Secretariat in 1992. Dr. Khan served as Chief de Cabinet to the President of the UN Assembly, and previous to that, he worked as a political advisor to the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United Nations. Dr. Khan is a national of Pakistan. He is a graduate of the London University and holding a doctorate in international law from Fletcher School of Diplomacy, Harvard Law School. I welcome Dr. Khan to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished parliamentarians in particular. Welcome you here to the United Nations headquarters to this very important gathering. And in particular, I'd like to thank our distinguished colleagues, His Excellency Ambassador Abdurrahmanov, the permanent representative of Kazakhstan, Madam Gallo, the distinguished Minister Councillor of Italy, and of course, Madam Irina Bukova, who unfortunately had to leave us, but of course we want to thank UNESCO under her great leadership for co-sponsoring this event together with the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics, and in particular Madam Shoshona, with whom we have been interacting for this very important high-level panel. And it is indeed a very good opportunity for us here at the United Nations to interface with so many parliamentarians from around the world who, in the spirit, in the democratic spirit, we believe very sincerely, particularly with regard to the challenge that we face, the challenge of violent extremism that is sweeping the world, that we must improve the interaction and interface with you, the parliamentarians, who represent the citizens of the world in the truest sense, and that this sort of dialogue has to go beyond the sort of esoteric academic to the very real issues with which you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis with regard to your political constituencies, with regard to the citizens that you serve, and through you, what we do here at the United Nations in supporting your very eminent and very challenging work around the world. The subject before us today, that of violent extremism, is perhaps one of the great challenges of our time in the 21st century. The reason is obvious. It is not a challenge that is endemic to any one particular nation, any particular one region, or to any one particular society. If we look at one manifestation of violent extremism today, there are foreign terrorist fighters from over 100 countries. And I'm sure that many of you who are represented here know of citizens from your own state who have ventured at a very young age, in some cases, as adolescents, young men and women who are full of promise and hope, who have gone to far lands in order to be drawn and inspired by evil ideologies that lead them ultimately to death, destruction, and mayhem. This is the challenge that we have, the challenge of preventing and ultimately saving our young children, because it is the young generation, the generation of 16 to 24-year-olds in our societies who are most vulnerable. And they are not only the future leaders, not only the future hope of our societies, but the citizens of our future societies who will build or not build the rest of the 21st century that lies ahead of us. And so we have an urgent agenda before us to build, as the theme of this session today, to build peaceful and inclusive societies. It is such a very apt theme for discussion, because without building an inclusive society, participatory society, and ultimately a peaceful society, we will have young people in particular on the margins, some of them not just marginalized, some of them highly educated, who are being drawn to these other alternative ideologies that preach death, destruction, and mayhem. Violent extremism is a direct assault on the United Nations Charter for all that it stands for, and a grave threat to democracy that you represent around the world. Because violent extremists not only oppose participatory government, they forcefully suppress the enjoyment of human and civil and political and economic and social rights. At the same time, violent extremists seek to divide and polarize our societies. And for this reason, we must refrain from assigning collective guilt to whole communities and religions, which would only be further exploited by such groups. Indeed, violent extremist groups' main agenda is not only to spill blood, but ultimately to sow the seeds of discord and polarization, and what is now a debunked myth, that of the clash of civilizations. We must forcefully reject their agenda of polarization and clash of civilizations. We must come together in an inclusive manner to confront this threat. Irrespective of the religions or the cultures or the nationalities or the ethnicities that we may represent. Violent extremism is a global threat. It transcends cultures and geographical boundaries and should not be associated with any one religion, nationality, or ethnic group. Indeed, today, violent extremists control territory, resources, and populations, and have blurred borders between sovereign states. The net result is a volatile vortex between protracted conflicts, terrorism, and violent extremism, which further enables violent extremists to thrive. And one of the challenges for us in places which are affected by conflict, protracted conflicts, by this vicious vortex, is to break that vortex so that new theaters of conflict are not also affected by terrorism and violent extremism. As I said earlier, young people in particular are targeted by violent extremists and sometimes blamed for their actions. We see sensational headlines about young killers or young women who join terrorist movements, and it is a distorted picture that fails to demonstrate the important contribution that young people are making largely around the world to peaceful and inclusive societies. The vast majority of young people are contributing to the progress of their societies, to the promotion of democracy and the building of peace. And we need to support that in a much more forceful, focused and constructive manner. For the past few years, the international community's response to violent extremism has been centered on countering the threat. Security and military responses alone obviously cannot defeat this scourge. And that is why we now need to look at a much more comprehensive and balanced approach. We need to engage earlier and address the drivers or the root causes of violent extremism before it comes to a military and security threat, which we have to then address through security measures. There is, of course, no single pathway and no complete or obvious algorithm that can unlock the secrets about what turns the wheels of violent extremism. But we know that violent extremism flourishes when aspirations for inclusion and participation and democracy are frustrated, marginalized groups linger on the sidelines of societies, when political space shrinks, and when too many people, especially young people, lack prospects and meaning in their lives. The Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, has made the prevention of violent extremism one of the highest priorities in his tenure. In January of this year, as some of our colleagues on the podium mentioned, the Secretary General presented a comprehensive plan of action to prevent violent extremism to the United Nations General Assembly, with over 70 recommendations for member states, as well as to parliaments and to civil society around the world, measures to address the drivers of violent extremism in 7 core priority areas. And I encourage you to please look at this global plan of action that the United Nations has developed. My own UN Counterterrorism Implementation Task Force brought 37 UN agencies together to develop this plan of action for the Secretary General, which has now been reviewed and endorsed and welcomed by the General Assembly during its 5th review of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy 2 weeks ago. The UN General Assembly resolution recommends that member states, quote, consider the implementation of relevant recommendations of the plan of action as applicable to the national context, and it encourages UN entities in line with their mandates to implement relevant recommendations of the plan of action, including by providing technical assistance to member states. And we are now mobilizing on looking at how, in a very systematic way, all the relevant UN agencies that are part of the UN Counterterrorism Implementation Task Force can help member states, governments, parliaments, civil society to ultimately take national ownership. Because ultimately, the primary responsibility for the prevention of violent extremism must, of course, remain with member states, with you, the nations and parliaments that are represented here. And to this end, the Secretary General has advocated that every country consider developing a national plan of action to prevent violent extremism. Clearly, the parliaments of the world, each one of you, have a critical role to play, particularly in providing the legislative framework for the development of those national PVE or national plans of action for the prevention of violent extremism. So that is the challenge before us, distinguished delegates, the challenge of forging national and also regional plans of action to prevent violent extremism. Because only through concerted, cooperative, international action, regional action, national action, local action, in a mutually reinforcing way, can we impact on this phenomenon. There is, as our distinguished panelists said, no magic wand, no magic solution, no quick fix. In fact, the danger of looking for quick fixes can sometimes often complicate the challenge of addressing some of the very complex aspects of violent extremism. The Secretary General's plan of action particularly calls for the empowerment of young people, women and community leaders, as well as fostering education, skills development and employment facilitation as part of our common struggle against poverty and social marginalization. Young people, who constitute the majority of the population of many countries around the world, must be viewed as a positive asset and must be empowered to make their constructive contribution to the political and economic development of their societies and nations. They obviously represent a huge untapped resource. It is the largest young population in the history of the world. And the parliaments that are represented here have a critical role to play in mobilizing, including and fostering the young people of today so that they can make and unleash the huge potential that they can represent for the development of their respective communities and nations. The General Assembly particularly welcomed UNESCO's engagement with member states to implement strategies to prevent violent extremism conducive to terrorism through education And here I would like to also add my voice of thanks and appreciation to the great leadership that Madam Irina Bokova, Director General of UNESCO, has played in leading UNESCO and the international community in fostering the contribution of education to the development of young people and their great potential in contributing to the prevention of violent extremism. Following the General Assembly's encouragement to the UN system, to the UN agencies, we are now, as I said earlier, mobilizing to bring the UN system under the leadership of the Secretary General through a high-level PVE action group to support you, the member states, the parliaments around the world, civil society, all the relevant bodies that can help forge a common global movement in preventing violent extremism around the world. This remains one of the highest priorities of the current Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, because we must focus our attention to shifting the paradigm, if you like, from a security-based counter-narrative towards a common prevention effort.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yang Khan, for your important words and stressing how important to tackle the roots of conflict and how important to have a good governance to marginalize these extremists in our world, under religion or otherwise. I think it is very, very important with the experience in Iraq, in Pakistan, in the United Nations, in Saudi Arabia. You must have lots of experience, which is very useful, and thank you very much for your words. Give me pleasure to introduce Lady Hanifa Mazoui, Senior Advisor of the High Representative for United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. Hanifa Mazoui, PhD, has enjoyed a distinguished career with the United Nations for the past 28 years, where she has been Chief of NGO Section of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA. Presently, she is Senior Advisor to the UN High Representative of the Alliance of Civilizations. His Excellency Nasser Abdelaziz and Nasser, in charge of the humanitarian affairs and civil society. Ms. Mazoui engaged the Alliance of Civilizations as a platform on which the international community can build greater understanding and communication to stem the tide of intolerance and misunderstanding. The initiative is indeed intended to offer a new perspective of hope and peace for security and development when the cultural diversity has been respected. Ms. Hanifa Mazoui holds a doctorate, PhD in French linguistics, an MA in French literature, an MA in applied linguistics, and an MA in business administration from the University of Aix in Provence, France, and is a recipient of numerous awards for her service in the field of women's rights and culture of peace. I welcome Ms. Hanifa Mazoui to speak.
Thank you very much. Since I'm the last speaker of this keynote panel, I will not mention all the mutual events that we have attended together since they have been mentioned by my previous colleagues and speakers. And also, I'm sorry that she's not going to hear it, but I hope at the liaison office we will give a message to Mrs. Irina Bokova. She had really put on the table a teacher guide on the prevention of violent extremism that is just have been published in 2016. So thank you very much for this guide. Excellency, distinguished parliamentarian, dear participant, colleagues and friends, and also old friends, dear Gianni, it is a great pleasure for me to be able to participate to the high-level panel on the role of parliaments for building peaceful and inclusive societies and combating violent extremism, organized by the Permanent Mission of Italy and Kazakhstan to the United Nations, UNESCO, and the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics. And it's a particular pleasure for me to deliver a message on behalf of His Excellency Nasir Abdulaziz Al Nasser, the High Representative of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, who conveys his profound regrets on being unable to participate personally in your deliberation. This topic is highly relevant to the mandate of the UNAOC, taking into consideration our mission in addressing some of our contemporary most difficult challenges, such as radicalization, extreme violence, and terrorism. The Alliance strives to create a peaceful and social inclusive world by building mutual respect among different cultural and religious identities. The role of parliamentarians is essential, particularly in addressing the means to reduce cross-cultural tension as well as building bridges. I would also like to highlight that United Nations Alliance of Civilization stands by parliamentarians in their efforts to advance democratic governance and to counter extremism with programs and activities which target and involve young leaders in promoting peace, cultural diversity, tolerance, and democratic processes worldwide. We all know that the rise of extreme violence and racial intolerance are direct violations on the principle of liberty, democracy, respect for human rights and fundamental freedom, and the rule of law. Parliamentarians ensure that there is a voice addressing this scourge. There can be no inclusive societies if inequality remains. If there is inequality, there will be violence. Radicalism emerges when people feel unsafe or unequal in their society. The four pillars of the Alliance, youth, migration, education, and media, are essential to addressing these inequalities. It is a platform for intercultural dialogue, understanding, and cooperation. Here are a few of our projects: the Intercultural Innovation Award, the Fellowship Program, the Youth Solidarity Fund. You will find all the details of this program in our website. This panel today complements the 7th United Nations Alliance of Civilization Global Forum that took place in Baku, Azerbaijan from April 27 to 25-27. The forum was titled Living Together in Inclusive Societies, a Challenge and a Goal. The forum was used to discuss ways to create more inclusive societies and combat violent extremism. All stakeholders were invited, particularly religious leaders. It is crucial to call on the religious and faith leaders to work together to bring religious mediation to counter terrorism. Close cooperation is necessary to overcome these challenges. Promoting dialogue between different religious groups, civil societies, and government is an important tool for peace. Parliamentarians have also bring meaningful contribution to mediation as a conflict resolution tool. The Alliance believes in using mediation as a form of preventive diplomacy. The same tools and recommendations need to be used to implement these goals of a culture of peace. The culture of peace values are based on the principle of freedom, justice, democracy, tolerance, and respect for diversity. The parliaments have helped achieve these goals by promoting the culture of peace resolutions at the United Nations. These resolutions are promoted by engaging religious leaders and parliamentarians as well. If we want to live in a peaceful and inclusive society and combat violent extremism, essential human elements have to be secure, such as the end of poverty, hunger, education, and transnational situation for migrants. These essential elements were discussed during this week by the High-Level Policy Forum. The HLPF concluded yesterday its 20th sessions, all inspired by the new Sustainable Development Agenda and the Global Agreement on Climate Change, signed by the 193 member states. They agreed on 17 Sustainable Development Goals to transform our world. I believe that engaging all aspects of the international community and by creating strong action programs to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we will progress to peaceful and socially inclusive societies. Let's take ownership of this agenda and focus on its implementation. Restore hope and make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khalifa Mazuri, for talking to us about the importance of equality as a prerequisite for fighting extremism and radicalism in this world, and it's important as well to create prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to end the session. Thank you all, this part of the event, first part, and thank you all, and thank all the speakers who played a major role in giving us ideas about the work in the country. And while there will be a video message by His Excellency Federico Mayer is being played, I would like to invite the next panel to come to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would very much like to be here today with you in this UN high-level forum.
Sure, I think they gave it AC mic.
Is it working? Very good, then we close here. There's no communication. Thank you very much. Excellent, thank you.
Maybe you should come closer. Is that mic there?
Can you hear me now? Yes?
Try that mic there.
Hello? Unfortunately, now it works. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you why I'm here. First, because we've heard many comments and many suggestions, especially in the last one. And let me tell you, first and foremost, one very simple fact of life. The initiative is rooted in the common human belief that we have all a network of hope, common basic principle, indeed, shared vision of a world where some human values bind us together. But unfortunately for you, I'm not a theoretician. So here we go. The first time I was taken at night in the streets of Lebanon at war, and blindfolded and locked up in a car before finding myself in front of masked men to negotiate the freedom of hostages in Lebanon, I wondered why did I accept to do that. None of the people I undertook to free from their chain was a member of my family, except the human family. That was good enough, I thought. And then I realized that perhaps I had not in my life said thank you enough to those who had helped me, and so my journey continued till several individuals, more than 10 of course, as you may remember, some of you who are old enough, continued till several individuals having been hostages for years were freed. When asked by one masked man why I had accepted such a risky assignment, I replied, because I like to pay forward. Perhaps tomorrow, I added, your son will do the same to save the life of my son. And so here I am, risking my life today to change the way we all behave. The bond which links human beings is too often being overshadowed by differences which we have created in our societies are very much defined by our differences, perceived or real. This is the reason why I'm here. I think I've taken less than a minute and a half. I'll now continue with the next speakers. And the next speaker is Lara Coni from the European Parliament, and she comes from Italy. Madam Coni, forgive me if I don't know the titles. I'm not a man of the chair, I'm a man of the street. Please.
Me too, because I am elected by preferences. So
very good,
it's
excellent.
not necessary.
Excellent.
So, first, I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity offered to me to speak in a place so eminent like this. I bring here with my emotion, my voice, and the voice of the European Parliament, the institution whereof I am a member since 2009. The European Parliament represents the citizens of now 28 countries, and I think that after 27 countries. And I am very proud to be here discussing the issue of fundamental relevance for Italy, my country, Europe, and the international community. The recent terrorist attacks in Paris and in Brussels have shocked European citizens. People don't more feel secure and protected living their everyday life. For this reason, it is important that each state gives its contribution in the fight against terrorism. Regarding Italy, there is the consciousness that, especially during the last 20 years, the state has covered an important role in the international peacekeeping and security missions. However, in the view of the present crisis and emergency risk on the global situation and more in general on the strategic international scenario, a new and scrutinized analysis on the role Italy has been playing in the international field is appropriate. When we talk about the international dimension, Italy is among the most important contributors both in terms of human resources employed and in terms of the financial contribution. However, concerning the peacekeeping operation of the last years, they have demonstrated that the military action alone could not be sufficient to reach the goal of stability. Italy is fully engaged in the defense of peace with the peacekeeping mission. At the moment, there are more than 9,000 military missions in more than 20 nations. Last February, Italy has signed an agreement with UNESCO for the Blue Helmets of the culture, a task force composed of police officers, researchers will intervene for the protection of the cultural heritage that is in danger due to conflict and natural disasters. Furthermore, Italy, after 27 years, has reformed the law of the international cooperation. This law is in line with the present times and insists on the willingness to recover the lost position of the last 2 decades in the ranking of international donors. Last, there is the project. 1 euro spent in culture and 1 in security. Terrorism cannot be won only with security measures because closing barriers means the victory of the terrorists. And if they cannot kill all of us, they try to threaten us and force us living like them. Therefore, pay attention to the security issue, but also to the initiative that make our life better. Only in this way, each euro spent in security policy could represent an investment, because we will be defending a life that deserves to be lived. In view of the wider concept of security that has developed during the last years, the aspect of cooperation and the civilian intervention in the managing of a critical situation, together with the synergy between civil and military activities, has assumed an increasingly important and effective prominence. The reasons that have encouraged Italy, and they still are inciting Italy to participate to peacekeeping operations, have different grounds. From the more traditional as the promotion of security inside the different geopolitical contexts, to those relative to the international recognition, to those others to the participation of the multilateral context and alliance. It is necessary to activate an instrument of peace that will become a priority also in the term of financial, economic investment for the country. These considerations are strictly relative to the global dimension that the fight against terrorism should be acquired. Italy cannot accept from this responsibility, and instead it must work for boosting more and more the relationship and the cooperation beyond the already existing international organism towards Europe. The construction of a joint action is required, which outcome will be the construction of a common European army with the same standards in terms of intelligence, military instruments, and communal priority. Italy has a strong legal reference point to look at Article 11 of the Italian Constitution that is built up on the concept of the repudiation of the war as a way to damage and subordinate our people. Article 11 forced the promotion and the maintenance of peace, the guarantee for security, and the duty to provide international justice. Today I am here to offer my contribution and testimony as Italian citizen and as a representative of a European institution. And that is why I believe that the role of politicals and institutions could not be limited to read what is happening and continue complaining about difficulties and deadlock. The only possible solution is made up of two steps. The first, we can to carefully analyze the critical situation, and the second step is consistent in starting an action, provide concrete initiative and programs. Some propose to build walls to control the border, but this means returning to the Europe of the past, and this is not what Europe and the world needs. Of course, the immigration issue must be faced, managed, and resolved, but it is not necessarily relative to the terrorist event. Often, terrorists that strike the heart of Europe are born and grow up in Europe, and this is the issue. How is possible to avoid that the lure of the Daesh recruiters its vulnerable and less structured minds? We need to improve school education and culture. At the end, we can win against the terror with a big culture exchange. Terrorists would like to kill us, or culture, but without having such results. They would like to oblige us living like them, as desperate people who hate life. The Europe we want is a place where people can be free, can achieve their aspiration, the place where everybody should not have fear. The land of opportunity and not of the terror. It is not simply, but Europe must win this barbarism to still exist. We Europeans need a change of strategy. Fiscal union, political union, and defense union, common European army, and are the first step. I am a rapporteur for this opinion about the European Union on defense, and I will be so happy that the European Parliament, the Commission, will concretize these aspects to be more secure. It is necessary to change the treaty for a new, stronger and fairer Europe for all citizens. Or we will have the failure of the European Union, with the great risk of the interruption of such a long period of peace. I have been directly elected by citizens. For this reason, I have the right and the duty to fight to change the Europe. I ask to all of you to help us, because only together we can win this challenge.
Thank you. Okay, does this work? I don't know how. Here we go. Okay, Dr. Saman Safri, Member of the Parliament of Pakistan. I remember our participants in this conversation that we have 6 minutes each. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, of course, I would like to thank the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics and the President, Mr. Beckerman, for inviting me here on this prestigious occasion and a very important topic to speak. I would like to send you all greetings from my beloved and resilient country, Pakistan. First of all, it is very important to note that violent extremism greatly depends on its local dynamics. For example, violent extremism in any part of Pakistan would be very different from any part of USA. And it might look the same as far as the outcome is concerned, but drivers, push-pull factors, and society's position with regard to the proposed goal can be very different. Violent extremism can be defined as the use of violence to attain social, political, and cultural goals that border on the extreme of the society's ideological makeup. Coming back to the main topic, which is the Parliament's role in combating violent extremism, there is no doubt, not even an iota of doubt, that Parliament can and should play their role in combating violent extremism and are the main body in any country. But it is also a fact that Parliament is the most important. It is also a fact that parliaments cannot work in isolation. The case in so many countries is the same, that parliaments try to play roles on individual basis, and that never ends in positive results. What the need is that the parliament should form cross-sectional consultative collaborations with media persons, think tanks, political parties which are not present in the parliament, the academics, the activists, religious scholars, and civil society. Only an unanimous and more holistic and representative counter-violent extremism policy can bring real change in terms of extremism. The second point that I would like to emphasize today is on promoting the culture of peace. When we say culture of peace, it is necessary to enable an environment that ensures and sustains and produces a peaceful society. But peace should not end at borders. We must be responsible for peace beyond borders as well. In a globalized culture, our actions often affect people of other countries, and there is a need for more altruistic attitude when it comes to parliaments. Care for your enemies, care for your people on the opposing sides of the conflicts as well. Care for everyone. For peace to prevail, conflicts need to be resolved, and in an increasingly collaborative world wherein policies, cultures impact each other, we need to play an important role in mediating international conflicts. For that, directly curtails violent extremism. The third point that I would like to emphasize on, and it is something that coming from a country which has been facing extremism for a long time, which has been and being personally affected by the results of extremism, I can only say that the local factors like politics, religious doctrines, and social norms are paramount when it comes to local legislation. For example, if I talk about my country, Pakistan, we need to stress on research investigating local factors in collaboration with local academics, law enforcement agencies, as I said in the initial remarks. Legislation should be promoted world over in simpler forms. If I just give you one example of Pakistan society, let me just quote the example of the blasphemy law in Pakistan. Pakistan is not ready to annul the blasphemy law. The society is not ready. The problem, of course, is the education, the democratic values. But this can only be done by smaller steps that can tackle such issues. And I would just like to also emphasize on the fact that the UN announced International Decade for Culture of Peace and Non-Violence for the Children of the World from 2001 and 2010. This is the time when my country, Pakistan, saw unprecedented violence resulting in death of 80,000 citizens, including children, thousands of children. So Pakistan is a society in transition, recovering from trauma. Such contours will affect its makeup, and the international community needs to manage its expectations from countries suffering from violent internal conflicts. When we sit on high forums like these, high-level discussion like these, we need to understand a lot of things, like I mentioned in my points. In the end, I would just like to say that the UN adopted a UNSC resolution on youth, peace and security, dealing with countering violent extremism, and we should stress upon the importance of using this resolution as well when we are talking about the manifestation of national level policies. I would also like to say in the end that it is very important for the international, and I will emphasize on this point, that it is very important for the international community to be more efficient in tackling funding to extremist movements. Without effective international laws to prevent, curtail, or mitigate such funding channels, it would be very hard to counter extremist movements. I have also proposed in my personal capacity in my country for a parliamentary caucus for Pakistani MPs to work on this and more generally on the counter-violent extremism policies. I would request the UN to support us not financially but by tactically and providing us tactical and educational facilitation and education in this regard. Finally, I would also propose more exchanges between MPs of different countries, especially within the MENA region and the South Asian, to develop synergies in these objectives. I always believe that channels of communications need to be open and facilitated. At the very end, coming from a country which is a victim and fighting on the forefront of violence extremism and being on a constant threat by the extremists, as my dear colleague here and esteemed moderator said in the beginning, for our human family, I would just like to say, end with Sadi's words, Adam's sons are body, limbs to say, for they are created of the same clay. Should one organ be troubled by pain, others would suffer severe strain. Though careless of people's suffering, deserve not the same human being. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Jaffe. Thank you for being so precise with your time. And I'm glad to have heard from you. After all, Pakistan was I first learned about the war during the first Afghan war, and I learned much in the streets of Pakistan at that time. The next speaker is the Honorable Diane Wilson of the US Congress, and I'm very privileged to give the floor.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure for me to be here as a member of Parliament, or Congress, former, but as the host for the United Nations here in New York, the United States of America. I look at the culture of peace in this way. C is a call. U stands for unite. L to lead. The T to urge realistic efforts. And that is our responsibility as parliamentarians, but as those who are interested in what happens in this world. Now, we were shocked at 9/11. All of you remember when our capital, one of our capital cities, New York, was attacked. It was a big, stirring moment for the United States of America because we thought oceans separated us from those countries that were under attacks. And so it was a call to look at what is happening in the world and to join with our allies to plan a reasonable approach to maintain the peace. We see a clash of religions being spawned by those whose primitive thinking feels that they're the only religion that we should respect. We here in America, by our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, has said that each person has inalienable rights. And one of the reasons why we came to the United States, and it became the United States, is to be able to practice your religion. And that leads us to, we must see that we share values that are peaceful, that are just, and that provide human dignity. The U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights call for that. We must have laws that structure civil society, and we must respond to the rule of law. Our young people are very, very apt to be encouraged to do what others are doing on the streets. And we see things happening in other areas of the world. And our young people get excited and motivated and want to take part. Well, we must be the standard barriers to eliminate the kinds of things that are happening today in other countries. Right here in the United States, we've had clashes, we've had attacks, and we now realize that we are members of the world that must respond to the terrorism that has reached our shores. Now, why does this happen? If you can guarantee prosperity, food, clothing, and shelter, and safety, good health facilities, opportunity, needs that meet the people's request, then you can avoid such. But if you slip on education, and we do not demand that our young people are educated in a global way, because now society is really global, and we respond immediately to what's happening in faraway places. So we must see that this new generation that is going on, we call them the millenniums, that they understand what is needed in civil society. And what you need is food, clothing, and shelter. You need to know that the door to opportunity opens when you're educated. We need to have them understand that a healthy society is a prosperous society. And so as we join here in this facility under the United Nations, we must extend our knowledge and our wealth across the waters to other nations. We must look at terrorism as a function of those people who have regressed, and they want to destroy our prosperity. So we have a common goal we should take here, to present the best ideas, to give the opportunity to others to come together in this nation of immigrants and respect the contributions that other people bring with them when they come and seek the kind of liberties that we offer to our citizens. We must hold hands around the globe. We must take action to bring the culture of peace into a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your words. I feel them deeply, having been a citizen of this country for decades and decades and decades. Mm-hmm. And now the floor is to the next speaker, Özcan Mutlu, from the Bundestag in Germany. Alles sicher? Fertig? Fertig. Bitte schön.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to focus a little bit on my own country and give you some figures, because violence, extremist violence has different faces. So it's not only religious extremism. We have different kinds of extremism all over Europe. Mrs. Comey addressed to it a little bit, and I would like to give you some figures from Germany. We have, for instance, last year we had 130 arson attacks on refugee shelters. We had 15,000 right-wing extremism in our country. This is something we have to focus on, because the more that happens, the more it has a reaction. Reaction like people who are under pressure, people who are under attack, people who are not who are attacked from this right-wing extremist violence in our country do the same, and they react. They react with different kind of extremism. It's religious extremism. In last Last year we got the numbers that approximately 600 foreign fighters are fighting in Syria who are from Germany. So there are a lot of foreign fighters fighting on the side of Daesh in Syria from Europe. Mostly these youngsters born in Germany, raised up in Germany, went to schools in Germany, and as soon as they're 17, 18 or 19, they all of a sudden decide to enter a plane, fly to Ankara or Istanbul, and then move towards the Syrian border. So this is, of course, a big problem for any society. And if we look what are the reasons for that, of course, we have to blame the families, we have to blame the places they have visited, for instance, all these Salafi mosques they have been in or something like that. But we have to blame ourselves as well, because they went to schools in our country for many, many years, and somehow we didn't succeed to give them our values which are universal human rights. So you shall not kill someone else because of religious reasons or because he is a non-believer or whatsoever. So therefore, in this manner, I believe that schools and education, to break it down to this issue, is the key. It's very, very important. So how can we change our schools? How can we change our curriculums that everybody, the one who is on the right-wing side as well as the one who is at the Salafi side or a religious extremist side, can somehow be taught in a way that he will accept not only our universal values, he will live it. So he will also be a role model for his own children, for his own society and so on. So that is a big task for the schools. It's a big task for teachers, for educators. We have to maybe change our educational system totally in all over Europe these days, to open our societies, to change our educational system to an inclusive system which respects intercultural backgrounds, which respects different religious, different languages and different cultures. Why is that important? Because if we don't do that, if we exclude minorities, wherever they come from, which religion they belong to, if we exclude them, others will come and tell them some stories they believe in, because somebody who's excluded from the majority one day will maybe ask for change. And the change someone gives them is, for instance, religious extremism or right-wing extremism, which our country is facing. But educational reforms cost a lot of money. In this booklet, for instance, from UNESCO, and we heard Frau Bokova before at the beginning as a keynote speaker, all these suggestions UNESCO made are not only the right suggestions, they are the ones we have to implement in our school system everywhere, in every country. But that costs a lot of money. Teacher training costs a lot of money. Changing teacher training is also very costly. Changing curriculum, changing the books. Exclusion is also in textbooks. And the way we teach. To give you one anecdote, I was in Germany in school. I'm from Turkey originally. When I was in high school, we had history lessons, and in history we also talked about the Crusades, of course. But in this history lessons, regardless that 80 to 90% of the students in the classroom were Muslims, we were talked about the Crusades like they did something to the Middle East which was positive. Right? Richard Lionheart was not a badly killer and a crusader. He was a great guy. So imagine the kids sitting in this classroom having a Muslim background and listening to these stories of the crusaders. So this is something which shows us how deeply we are in need for reform of our textbooks, of our teacher training, and how desperately we do need open our schools, open our minds, and change the mindset. And this is something which is not only for the minorities, it is also very important for the majority. If we do intercultural education, intercultural teachings in school, no one will feel excluded, and the kids who belong to the majority won't be afraid from the other kids who have a different religion or who do believe to a different God. So therefore, more money for education, a different kind of textbooks. We have to reform our textbook. We have to reform our teacher training, and all that costs money. And to give you another example, if you look at our budgets in your countries, how much is spent for military and how much is spent for education. So this is something we have to fix. We have to put more money into education than into military spendings, and then we will have maybe the chance in future to change something. Otherwise, a guy like Huntington will sooner or later because of all these cultural clashes, will be right, and nobody here in the room wants him to be right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker on my list is a member of the Parliament of Morocco, Mrs. Jalila Mosley. Fadal, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much. I thank you for inviting me to talk about the role of national legislation to implement the culture of peace and to combat violent extremism in my country, the Kingdom of Morocco. As you may know, Morocco, by its geographical position and its involvement in regional and international fight against terrorism, is directly targeted by terrorist threats in its internal security and also in its external interests. Morocco is located in a potentially unstable regional environment where the terrorist threat has intensified in the wake of the riots that shook some countries in the region and created critical political and socio-economic situations. Morocco faces the repetitive threats and the persistent efforts of terrorist groups to undermine its national security. And with the previous, Morocco has underwent several terrorist attacks in the past, and this is why we had a whole plan to react to this phenomenon. So the Kingdom of Morocco is at the heart of the dynamics resulted from the international terrorism, because we managed to develop a model of religious governance based on moderate and tolerant form of Islam, which is becoming increasingly a unique model from which several states who are facing radicalism are looking to be inspired from. And mainly here I'm stating states or countries of sub-Saharan Africa, and even some European countries after the terrorist attacks, mainly in France and Belgium. Also, the political system in Morocco combines the respect of both traditional and modern values that act as a shield against the advance of extremist ideologies. In addition to that, Morocco is directly involved in the fight against terrorism as I mentioned, in neighboring countries, offering its expertise and know-how, and also sharing the best practices and trying to put a framework for especially for I will not say terrorists, but Moroccans living in other countries who are issued from the Moroccan immigration. This is particularly, and it is in this particular security context that the various terrorist organizations have continued to issue threats against Morocco, especially the Daesh, that promised to expand its caliphate to all Maghreb countries. And as we know, today it's close to our country, because in Libya, for example, Daesh is very powerful, and this represents a direct threat to Morocco. Facing these new security challenges, the Kingdom of Morocco has adopted a preventive and operational strategy, both internally and within the framework of its cooperation with its strategic allies. We are presently playing a leading role in the fight against terrorism through a three-axis strategy based on the optimization of security governance and the upgrade of legal framework. Secondly, on the fight against social insecurity and promoting sustainable human development. And thirdly, by restructuring the religious field. In this regard, a Moroccan anti-terrorism legislation was adopted to criminalize not only terrorist acts, but also travel to conflict zones, as well as any financial or logistical support of terrorist groups or terror acts. So the adoption of a series of laws, including the counterterrorism law number 0303, enacted in 2003, just after the terrorist attack that we had in the city of Casablanca, has allowed Morocco to respond adequately to the challenges of violent extremism. This legal framework was strengthened by the adoption lately in 2015 of another law, amending and completing some provisions of the criminal code this time, and the criminal procedures code relating to terrorism. Applied in June 2015, this law has criminalized the attempt to rally the conflict zones, punishable by a sentence of 5 to 10 years of imprisonment. Also, propaganda or praise for the terrorist organizations operating abroad is also punishable by the same law. Regarding the Kingdom's policy in countering the financing of terrorism, there are articles of the Criminal Code adopted in 2013 which are criminalizing terrorist financing and considers it as an act of terrorism. According to the same article, the financing of terrorism is taken into account independently from the perpetration of the terrorist act, whether the funds are related to a terrorist act or relate to the financing of a terrorist individual or organization. So, the national counter-terrorism strategy in its global approach is also supported by other social measures initiated in the context of reducing inequalities. In this perspective, Morocco launched in 2005 the National Initiative for Human Development, which advocates the fight against exclusion, insecurity, and radicalism. This initiative works effectively through its participatory approach, including government services and including also the civil society, and places the citizen at the center, encouraging income-generating projects and jobs, and also expects to avoid the instrumentalization of social precarity. Also, as a part of the reform of the religious field, Morocco has adopted a series of measurements aimed to fight against various forms of extremism and promote the values of moderation and tolerance enshrined in Islam. Measures and programs hereinafter involve the preliminary stage to prevent the radicalization of individuals. In this respect, the new Moroccan religious strategy aims primarily at urging all the religious institutions and actors in the country, including the religious counselors, or as we call them, the imams and morshidat for the females, strengthen the commitment to the main national and religious precepts of the country. Because we are aware today that the discourse or the speech of the religious counselors is very important in forming the vision that the country and the Muslim community is having about Islam and about concepts like jihad and related concepts to it. So it's clear that for us, the restructuring of the religious field, it was initiated in the direction of the fight against radicalization and the promotion of the fair values of moderation as practiced by Moroccans for centuries. This strategy took shape through structural reforms illustrated by the establishment of regional and local ulama council, while asserting a supreme ulama council as the sole entity responsible for the issuing of the fatwa, because the fatwa is very important in Islam. It's the opinion or the advice that the preachers and religious people give to the Muslims in order, it's like orders to them, as a way to encounter the proliferation of anarchic fatwas. And this anarchy in fatwas is very dangerous and very harmful to a lot of communities. So on this basis, the Supreme Ulama Council has developed, in coordination with the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, a qualification program for imams to better carry out their duties, having as a mission the preservation of the nation's spiritual security. Finally, the challenge of combating terrorism or violent extremism should go together with the culture of promotion of peace. Peace, which is a cultural and historical aspect of the Moroccan character, has to be put in front, and in this respect, a reform that has been just launched lately, 2 months ago, concerning the revision of school curricula to make it in conformity with peace values for the future generations, for a better world and a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have now completed with this. We do have a tape. Do we have a tape?
Yes. Video.
The video? Yeah. I think we have the Italian Senator Ferdinando Casini, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee.
Thank you.
Given the ambiguous position and principles of Islam, as well as its legacy in this regard. Nevertheless, there are events which have rendered the discussion of such a theme necessary in the current circumstances. And Muslims must show that these events have no basis of justification in Islam's frame of reference. Muslims who show or have to show that certain events which have happening under the guise of Islam are driven or prompted by considerations which have nothing to do with religion. With much of the world's attention focused on Europe and the threat of ISIS, North African states such as Morocco, Algeria are also facing a difficult internal battle against terrorist groups. These terrorist groups declare their loyalty to the Islamic State. Over the past 3 years, authorities, for instance in Morocco, have been working rigorously to stamp out the internal threat posed by ISIS and its affiliates. The country, ladies and gentlemen, is no stranger to terror. In March 2003, dozens of people were killed in a serious bomb of attacks in Casablanca. And in 2011, 15 people, including many foreigners, were killed at a popular cafe in Marrakesh. Since the Islamic State emerged in Syria and Iraq, Moroccan intelligence and services have been monitoring local fighters who have been drawn to the conflict. At least 220 who have returned have been arrested. while over 280 have been killed in the fighting. The fear that has of these returnees could unleash is now a daily concern for the police and intelligence services. For example, the 2003 attacks in Casablanca were arranged by two individuals who had fought in Afghanistan. Last Tuesday, just the day before yesterday, my country's Minister of Interior announced that a jihadist cell of 10 members, which have dismantled 3 months ago, was planning to carry out biological attacks in the kingdom, precisely hotels where non-Muslims and foreigners reside, and also on security centers and touristy areas. Chillingly, it noted that some of the seized substances from the suspects are classified by international organizations which specialize in health issues as falling with the category of biological weapons dangerous for their capacity to paralyze and destroy the nervous system and cause death. Closer to home, insecurity in neighboring Libya has also helped to attract dozens of Moroccan jihadists. In 2015, there were estimated to be at least 300 fighting for Islamic State in Libya. On March 24th, Moroccan authorities announced that a group of jihadists linked to Islamic State in Libya had been arrested in 3 cities. The group was on the verge of launching an attack. Last year in September, an Islamic State cell was broken up, which was keeping a safe house in the coastal city of Essaouira in Morocco. The group known as the Caliphate Soldiers in Morocco modeled itself on an existing group in Algeria, previously linked to Al-Qaeda, that now loyal to the Islamic State. The group was waiting to be trained on the manufacture of explosives. The country's new judicial body, or known between brackets as Moroccan FBI, called the Central Bureau of Judicial Investigations, which was established as part of amended anti-terror legislation in January 2015, has been instrumented in uncovering jihadist groups in the first 6 months of its creation. It had thwarted the activities of at least 15 terrorist cells. 1 minute. Austere schools of Islamic thought, such as Salafism, have over the years found a receptive audience in Algeria and in Morocco. Many young Moroccan radicals were inspired by sheikhs or icons who were sentenced for 30 years of charges concerning connecting them to the 2003 terror attacks. They were later pardoned by His Majesty King Mohammed VI in 2011, and some of them have even joined political parties lately. It was with the help of Moroccan intelligence that the French police were able to track the strategist of the November attacks in Paris, who is named Abdelhamid Abaoud. His brother Yassine was also detained in October on his possible links to terror. With such examples of cooperation, Morocco can expect continued support from both United Nations and Europe. Governments across the MENA region have never played such a critical role in the battle against Islamic State. Want me to finish? Yeah,
Please,
sorry.
thank you.
Yeah. I would just so I would like, before I leave this room here, Canada, to suggest 4 main yet essential actions which extremism countries of origin should take through your recommendations. 1 is empowering civil society in strengthening political stability and good security governance tools. 2, redoubling greater efforts in the fight against poverty, inequality, and social exclusion, locally and in a region as a whole. 3, continuing to support and contribute to the actions initiated globally. 4, and last, seeking to develop cooperation between African states and reinforce their capacities in the field of counterterrorism and the fight against violent extremism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Habib. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Boris Pincus. He's the president of Religion in Dialogue, an organization based in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today to talk and discuss with you about the issue which is disturbing now for everybody, regardless of your country of origin, regardless of your community or other organization which you belong to. I'm Boris Pincus. I'm Jewish. I was born in Uzbekistan, former Soviet Union republics. I'm in the United States since 1991, over 25 years. I was born in Orthodox environment, but I know Islam. I know Islam very well. Those who are familiar with Jewish history knows that Jews survive because of Islam. Let's take 15th, 16th centuries. When Arabs saved life of Jews in Spain, in other countries of European countries. Let's take World War II. Millions and millions of Jews life refuge in Turkey, in Morocco, in Algeria, Libya, in other countries of Islamic world. But now we're facing terrorism. Terrorism made by people who are committing crimes on the sake of Allah. I am, as American citizen, proud to live this country which is the best in terms of democracy. At the same time, I'm worried about Islamophobia. I have brothers, sisters amongst Muslims. One of them today with me, member of this panel, Aga Jafri from Pakistan, who helped me right after September 11 to set up non-for-profit organization. It calls Religions in Dialogue. Our purpose was to tell Americans that those who committed crime in September 11 never ever represented Islam. Islamic world totally different. And we created a team which includes imams, rabbis, and priests. Our purpose was to visit religious schools, Muslim religious schools, Jewish religious schools, and Christian religious schools, and deliver lectures about common values, values which unite us, not divide us. And thanks my brother Aga Jafri, who helped me to come to one of the largest Muslim schools in New York City. It's called Razi School, over 500 students, where rabbis and priests deliver lectures which were focused on our common values. You cannot imagine what happened in this school. We opened to these students new planet. We cannot imagine how impressive it was, lectures. Then we brought over 200 Muslim students to our Jewish Museum of Jewish Heritage in downtown Manhattan. They attended in Holocaust programs. First time they heard about Holocaust. In other words, I would like to appreciate gentlemen, member of German Parliament, who talk about education. We never talk about the roots of terrorism. There are two factors. Number one is poverty. Number two is lack of education. We have to talk about changing the system of education. Convince our parliaments to put in the curriculum subjects dedicated to the history of religions and common values. I hope this event will have continuations. I would like to appreciate Shoshana Beckerman, who initiated this program. And I hope all of us, including parliaments of members of United Nations, will pay enough attention to this event, and we will continue our activities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Now I'd like to introduce, and I'm glad this is a good segue, Aga Jafri. Aga is the founder of the American Muslim Congress. He migrated to the U.S. in 1968, and after finishing his education, he joined the U.S. government in Health and Human Services area. He's been a community organizer, and now he's currently Secretary General of the American Muslim Congress, and he's working on his first book, The Crescent Also Rises. welcome Dr. Turner.
Shalom, greetings and salam alaikum. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure to be here, and especially I must commend our sister Shoshana Beckerman for being so perceptive and visionary in organizing this high-level panel on the role of Parliament for building peaceful and inclusive societies and countering violence extremism. Before us, this panel, there were a couple of other panels who spoke in great detail as to the role of civil societies and what we can do. Parliament is a very, very important part and integral part, and having focus on the parliamentarian is very essential. And I tell you why. Ladies and gentlemen, in countries like Pakistan, where I come from, the population is controlled more and ruled more by the imams in a mosque, or Islamic center, a religious center, than even by the rulers. Parliamentarian, being from the grassroots, can play a very important role, simply because that's the way it is. So the pulpit is the place. Pulpit is where the problem is. In societies like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Morocco, and other countries. And I'm sure the very esteemed speakers who spoke before me, they pointed out, especially the gentleman from Bundestag in Germany, talked about changing the syllabus. But to control the imams is the key here. Unless you do something about really stopping these imams in fomenting hatred, bigotry, and all kinds of discrimination and defamation of people of other faiths, it's not going to work. It is very difficult in general to control that. Now these folks, these terrorists, the ISS and Al-Shabaab and Nusra and Al-Sham and Taliban, we talk about all of them. Where did they come from? They did not fall from the sky. They are from amongst us. And they are from those madrasas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thousands of those madrasas where these imams are teaching them what they should not be taught. And this is the key in this cathedral of decency and diplomacy and civility. I must be very careful. We have in this body the countries which are spreading this ideology of Salafism and Wahhabism. It was mentioned in a footnotish fashion. But believe me, my friends, the core problem, the mother of all the problem, the root cause of all the problem is this ideology. And that's where ideology is taught in some of these, I shall not mention the name of the country. These ideologies are taught in those countries. And these people are made to believe that others who are not what you are, which is Muslim, are animals. They are kafir, which is infidel. They are najis, unclean, and all kinds of things. Even though they don't spare even Muslims. Shia Muslims are singled out as being the people of wrong side, and they should be annihilated, exterminated. The United Nations, a body which is so esteemed and so holy and so sacred and so noble, must get down to the effort, must come down to the realization that it cannot be controlled by a single country. Again, not to mention, it's very sad, a country recently, as late as 6 weeks ago, told Mr. Moon that unless he delete the name of that country, of that particular country, from the list of bad nation, that country will stop giving any financial aid for Syria, for South Sudan, and for Palestinian in Gaza. So this blackmail must stop. This body should be very fair. Mr. Moon was very honorable. He was very ethical. He came out, I sent the press, my friend, and he said that this was done to me. I was blackmailed. I really like to commend him for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Rabbi Yaakov David Cohen. He's the president of the UN NGO Institute for Noam Heidkel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the ambassadors, rabbis, fellow clergy, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to offer a cure for Ms. Dayan
was and for what you spoke about, the idea cure represents communications, understanding, respect, and education. When we have a cure, an education, that universal no-hide code, which is essentially, we all come from Noah. We all come from the original, all religions date back to Abraham, to Noah. And this code is universal in its text because it allows all people to live in peace and harmony. I would like to open with a saying from our sages. Ben Zoma says, who is wise? One who learns from every person. Who is brave? One who subdues his negative inclination. Who is rich? One who appreciates what he has. Who is honored? One who gives honor to others. Our sages teach in the Talmud that the key to wisdom is humility. For the one thing that blocks our potential is wisdom, is arrogance. If I told you that the most humble person in the world, you'd probably picture him to be a small, bent-over person, soft-spoken, etc. But in fact, the Torah, the Bible, describes Moses as the humblest man that ever lived. Moses stood up to Pharaoh in Egypt, secured the release of the Jewish people, scaled Mount Sinai, spoke to God face to face, and led the Jewish through the desert to the borders of Israel, and gave humanity the universal no-hide code for peace, to live by peace and harmony. How could this man, who obviously possessed extraordinary qualities of leadership and strength, describe as the humblest man who ever lived? The answer is because humility means recognizing that the tremendous skills and talents and accomplishments that we all have, they're not from ourselves, they're from God. Today we are faced with violent extremism. We all want peace. All people innately desire unity, for love is the very essence of our soul. A human being is a social creature. For this, both love and hate are such powerful emotions. Ultimately, the key to peace is seeing what unites us and realizing that we are all created in the divine image. And I have a book titled Divine Image. You're welcome to read it in 4 different languages on my website. And we learn and we realize from each other. Terrorism strikes at a core. On the very day of Orlando massacre, the Jewish world commemorated what's known as Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. The holiday takes place on the 50th day of the moment that the Jewish nation fled the land of Egypt. In 2006, we celebrated 3,328 years of the giving of the Universal Code, and it clearly commands respect life, do not assassinate. A man took the lives of 49 unarmed civilians and became the 50th on their day. Humanity has a shared and broader, no matter where we live. All humanity has a common solution, which is the Universal No-Hide Code, which encompasses all religions and political and legal spheres, no matter where they hail from. The Universal No-Hide Code was given to the Torah Bible at Mount Sinai for all religions and all people. The respect, I'm not going to go through, I'm just going to briefly say what they are. The first one is to believe in God. The second one is not to curse God, to establish a relationship. The third one is not to kill, not to steal, not to commit adultery. And the sixth one is not to be cruel to animals. And the seventh one is to establish courts of justice, respect law and order. Because as it's often said, no peace, no justice. I'm just going to conclude. The Universal No-Hide Code rises above all politics, justice, and religious systems and boundaries. It comes from the Torah, which we Jewish people have lived in every corner of the earth, in every different environment, socially and culturally, and we've survived and thrived, and we've provided, wherever we go, we provide both physical and spiritual blessings to all people. So the Torah was given for the sake of peace. Peace is its cure. The cure is communication, understanding, respect, and education. Thank you. Salam. See you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Rafiq Mustafa, Chairman of the British Arab Network, and he's the former chairman of the Egyptian community in the UK. He is also the author of Egypt, the Elusive Arab Spring. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good presentation. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm really very honored to speak and to be here today, as I attended also many meetings to address that issue of peace. Thank you. And coexistence. I believe multi-track diplomacy is very important. It is a new buzzword. Particularly, many governments are failing to tackle the problem of radicalism and terrorism. I actually listened to Galila Mosri and about fatwas, La Hussein Kobid's courage to spell out the controversy inside our religion, Islam, and the real risk story of Gianni Picco in Lebanon, combined with Lady Diana Watson, U.S. Congresswoman, on being the U.S. on the receiving end of 9/11. Middle East have lost about 2.5 million people killed lives over the past 60 years due to radical ideology. Radical ideology is a byproduct of substandard governance and the erosion of human rights. We should recognize that. I'm a doctor and I know to treat a patient, I got to make a diagnosis so I can make a headway of management and treatment. We have to recognize we have a problem. It's important to encourage institutions, civil society, parliament, through parliament which represent people, not just paper parliament, is very important. I know it is difficult and very sensitive issues, but we've got to tackle it because parliament at the end of the day represents the aspiration of the people. I think world powers need to face the fact that societies where inequality, with lack of institutional, where rule of law is not upheld, there is going to be a problem, and they got to support these countries to stand on its feet, as we could see in other countries, like what happened in Turkey last few days. It's a very important role model for the Middle East, Turkey, in my view. So I believe that in Middle East in particular, we have a challenging times ahead as religion and politics are entwined and exploited on a grand scale. The lack of separation of religion from politics is a problem. It's already sparkled in medieval type of wars, as we read it every day in the newspaper. What I want to say and conclude after all this distinguished guest spoke today, that really we got to be very clear and be brave to say that we need the public, the people, human rights to be respected, need good governance. We need to move to the future as Eastern Europe have moved out of communism and dictatorship. We need Islamic world to emerge as states respecting people and to have a good governance and to prosper too, which I feel as Egyptian and British person, I feel it very close to my heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Yashar Sholak. He's a social and religious affairs counselor at the Turkish Embassy in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Sholak will convey the message of Professor Dr. Mehmet Gorman as the top cleric in Turkey. Welcome.
Thank you. High Excellencies, that's okay?
No,
Not done? Okay. High Excellencies, the Honorable Political, Religious, academic, and media leaders, eminent scholars, and dear participants. I greet you all. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for providing us an opportunity to meet each other and discuss such important issue under the title, The Role of Parliaments for Building Peaceful and Inclusive Societies and Combating Violent Extremism. It's really important that this panel discussion is held in a time when we face so many tough challenges to build peaceful and inclusive societies, and when we suffer from violent extremism every corner of the world. I came to your presence to read a short message from the President of Religious Affairs of Turkey, a top cleric in the Republic of Turkey, who was invited to this panel as a keynote speaker, but he couldn't attend it due to recent political tension in Turkey. With your permission, I would like to read the message of Professor Mehmet Görmez, President of Religious Affairs of Turkey. I begin my message by the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I greet you all from the bottom of my heart. I am addressing you from a geography where the worst violence scenarios, the dirtiest wars, and the bloodiest terror tragedies, political turmoils have been witnessed in such a way that the world has ever seen. Within these chaotic conditions, talking about peace, inclusiveness, and combating extremism becomes very meaningful and more important. Having stressed that, I would like also to emphasize that as religious and political leaders, we need to be more convincing, and we need to utter more convincing words to people about root causes of conflict, violence, and terrorism. We cannot simply convince peoples who are robbed of their human dignity and living in poverty, injustice, by simply stating that all conflicts and terror evolved due to lack of religious tolerance and respect. We, as religious functionaries, can pray for peace. We can strive to purify our nations and congregations from anger and enmity, and we can also console or comfort those who have gone through such difficulties and tragedies. However, we cannot really succeed and go beyond useless rhetoric if we barons of arms still continue to gain, if violence professionals still continue to inflict terror and death upon others. We cannot be successful unless we prevent injustice and poverty, exploitation and plundering of natural sources, and protect human rights, improve conditions for people's education. This panel may become a useful platform and contribute to establish a positive and productive communication between adherents of different religions and give a voice to multiple and focused discussions of the problems in a sincere and constructive way. I would like to conclude my message by making a call to unity. We are making this call to unity so that we can re-establish our shared humanity, so that we can coexist under the umbrella of humanity. This call to unity is not only a call for unity among Muslim brothers and sisters, rather it's a call to all humanity, as Islam is a religion that encompasses and shows compassion for all of mankind. I pray that our Lord save us from all of the evil that is besieging us, and that our Lord preserves our unity as brothers and sisters in mankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cholak. At this time, I'd like to welcome Shoshana Beckerman, the Director of the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics, and the person responsible for putting this together today, to say a few concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. We're co-partners with UNESCO and, as you know, the host mission Italy. I always like to begin on this initiative with the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO, which declares that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that defenses of peace must be constructed. So our initiative basically is trying to fill a gap in the current global compass. So far in the United Nations and as defined by the Constitution of UNESCO, the purpose of the organization is to contribute to peace and security by promoting collaboration among nations through education, science, and culture in order to further universal respect for justice, for the rule of law, for human rights and fundamental freedoms which are affirmed for the peoples of the world without distinction of race, sex, language, or religion by the Charter of the United Nations. But since the establishment of the United Nations, there have been many resolutions and many initiatives that have called for the culture of peace. The patron of the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Global Ethics, whom you've heard, His Excellency Professor Federico Mayor, actually introduced the concept of the culture of peace to the United Nations when he was Director General of UNESCO. And since that time, there has only been one nation that has actually initiated legislation for the culture of peace, and that was Spain. We have taken upon ourselves the initiative, hopefully with additional UN member states, to bring parliamentarians together who are committed to also institute and at least initiate in their national parliaments such legislation. I will quote from the Spanish law, which was accepted in 2005, and under the administration of Prime Minister Zapatero, who was also one of the initiators of the Alliance of Civilizations. You heard today from the representative of the Alliance of Civilizations. This law I'm quoting a little bit from this law, acknowledging the absolute decisive role of education as a driver of evolution of societies in the framework of the International Decade for a Culture of Peace, which took place 2001 to 2010, proclaimed by the United Nations, aims to provide a starting point from which to replace the culture of violence, which has defined the 20th century, with a culture of peace, which must characterize the new century. The culture of peace is comprised of all values, behaviors, attitudes, practices, feelings, and beliefs which ultimately shape peace. Today we've heard from basically the Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. There are also representatives here of the Buddhist faith, and we have a lot to learn from the Eastern religions, which are based on the culture of peace. Legislation which we hope will be accepted in all the parliaments of the UN member states at the end of this initiative will include the elements, hopefully, of all the religions, and because we all have what to learn from each other, and respect for all religions and all races. I'll quote a little bit more from this Spanish law. In order to achieve the above peace goals, the government is to promote the teaching of subjects at all levels of the education system in accordance with the values which characterize a culture of peace, and the creation of specialist subjects on the issue relating to education for peace and democratic values. Is to promote the inclusion of initiatives relating to education for peace in the local and national education curriculum, and combine teaching with education system with the promotion of education for peace for everyone and for life by training adults in the above values. It is one of the major goals here is to encourage, from the point of view of peace, the incorporation of values of nonviolence, tolerance, democracy, solidarity, and justice in the context of textbooks, teaching and educational materials, and audiovisual programs aimed at students. Today we know this was again accepted in 2005, and Spain is the only country that has such a law in place. Today we know that social media plays a great role, and any new law that will be developed will have to deal with this. So Towards the future, we are looking to develop sort of a prototype or a model legislation which can then be adapted to the particular and circumstances of each nation. But hopefully, at the end of this process, maybe the world will be a little bit more peaceful and a little bit more respectful, and we'll be able to combat violent extremism together with the United Nations, but reach a concrete level of activities. So thank you very much to all the speakers who came from quite far, and also maybe some of you at the last minute. Thank you to all the participants, and we hope you'll help follow up with us to make this a reality in the future. Thank you very much.